Oh. All right, let's do it. Welcome to an Anatomy of an Opening, a weekly series here on... It's not weekly. Welcome to an Anatomy... There's something in my eye. Anyway, welcome to an Anatomy of an Opening, a series here on YouTube where I break down the opening page of an acclaimed novel, sentence by sentence, to really figure out what makes it tick. In this video, we are going to take a look at a classic, and that classic is going to be Dune by Frank Herbert. There's still something in my eye. God. We begin with our opening sentence. In the week before their departure to Arrakis, when all the final scurrying about had reached a nearly unbearable frenzy, an old crone came to visit the mother of the boy Paul. Now, this opening does a lot of things, but the most important one is that it gives the reader a sense of what's coming. It sets a sort of specific fantasy genre tone. While not being incredibly creative or really all that gripping, it's still structurally sound and manages to accomplish enough to at least get the reader to read on to the next sentence. Dune isn't that old, but more classic novels don't tend to have the emphasis on really hooking the reader that novels today do. Back then, the competition wasn't so stiff, and they really tended to trust the reader. There are three things that this opening accomplishes. 1. It addresses the focal point of the early story in just a few words, establishing that our main cast is about to move to a brand new planet. 2. The sentence also brushes lightly on the fact that this entire process has been a bit of a whirlwind for our main cast, which does a lot to imply a sense of pace and excitement without resorting to dramatics. Finally, with the simple sentence, an old crone came to visit the boy Paul, Herbert establishes our main character, even if it's not totally explicit yet that this story revolves around this character Paul. In an elegant fashion and using as few words as possible, he slips in the detail that our protagonist is young, as well as implying a light intrigue in the mention of the old crone who's coming to visit. The next section reads, "It was a warm night at Castle Kaladin, and the ancient pile of stone that had served the Atreides family..." I hope I'm pronouncing all this stuff right. I should really research pronunciations before I make videos. Nah. The ancient pile of stone that had served the Atreides family as home for 26 generations bore that cooled sweat feeling it acquired before a change in the weather. This one is a long sentence and exists exclusively to establish a sense of place. But I think it works really well. And it's also important to note that Herbert just glazed over this sentence without getting too bogged down in the weeds of description, which is something you never want to do. He simply drops you a couple nuggets to provide you with a sense of place. As I read this sentence, I get a visceral image of a castle. This may not be the exact castle that was in Herbert's head, but this is what I love about minimal, evocative description. His sentence gives the reader a feeling and our minds fill in the blanks. So the first part of the sentence gets the boring parts out of the way. "It was a warm night at Castle Kaladin" isn't a special sentence. He's just telling us the name and location. And my favorite part of the sentence where he says that the house bore that cooled sweat feeling it acquired before a change in the weather. This is great description to me because it pretty much leaves out all visual cues, but it leaves you with an interesting idea. It makes you stop and think, what is that cooled sweat feeling? And somehow in your head, you know exactly what he's talking about. Moving into the next line, "The old woman was let in by the side door down the vaulted passage by Paul's room, and she was allowed a moment to peer in at him where he lay in his bed." Now, I won't linger on this sentence because it's rather telly. It serves only to advance the practical elements of this scene, and that's fine. It serves its purpose and moves us on. It establishes a closer look at the scene that is about to unfold. I like to think of it as if I'm watching a movie that begins with a beautiful wide shot of a new world, and this sentence is the camera slowly zooming in. The next line reads, "By the half-light of a suspenser lamp, dimmed and hanging near the floor, the awakened boy could see a bulky female shape at his door, standing one step ahead of his mother." Now this one offers much the same, painting a picture for the reader. The mention of the suspenser lamp is a nice touch, serving the purpose of establishing a fantasy, otherworldly feel, where they may have different technology or names for things than we do. If you are a writer starting out, it's important to note these little details, the small things in seemingly unimportant words. words. All of it is information that the author is getting across to the reader subtly, and if you don't notice it, that's a good thing. The point is for these things to go unnoticed, but felt and understood. Moving into the next line, the old woman was a witch shadow, hair like matted spiderwebs, hooded round darkness of features, eyes like glittering jewels. This description is structurally sound, not too little and not too much. I think the descriptors used can be a bit basic and even stereotypical, but I can't detract from it too much because this book is of its time, and things were different in the writing industry back then. Also, it's okay to be a little stereotypical at times, assuming you're not being offensive. I honestly like the witch-like visuals that he gives. Adding on the basic, well-trodden, yet somehow still satisfying description of eyes glittering like jewels. The next part is where my love for the page really takes off, and it's rather simple. "Is he not small for his age, Jessica?" the old woman asked. Her voice wheezed and twanged like an untuned balisette. Oh, it just reads so good. Her voice wheezed and twanged like an untuned balisette. The old woman's question establishes Paul as a possibly weak and young-looking protagonist, but it's what comes next that really knocks it out of the park for me. Her voice wheezed and twanged like an untuned balisette. This is evocative with a personal touch, and most importantly, it reads beautifully, like a broken song, drawing a contrast of what beauty could have been, was it not withered and uncared for. This right here is exactly how I want to see description sprinkled into a narrative. So moving into the next line, Paul's mother answered in her soft contralto, "The Atreides are known to start late getting their growth, your reverence." Keeping the musical theme, Herbert draws a contrast with Paul's mother, implying her to be what the old woman might have been long ago. Next, we read, so I've heard, wheezed the old woman. Yet he's already 15. Yes, your reverence. Now, there's not a lot to say about some of these short sentences, but while they are basic dialogue, they are well crafted and important in my opinion for this reason. Without being overly dramatic, there's a tension to them. Tension and conflict make stories, and no matter how intensely they're painted, a scene without a form of conflict is often boring to the reader, even if the reader doesn't exactly pick up on why. This next section is going to be the last that we read. He's awake and listening to us, said the old woman. Sly little rascal, she chuckled. But royalty has need of slyness, and if he's really the Kwisatz Haderach, well... I'm gonna be honest, I'm tired of trying to pronounce all these darned fantasy names. Anyway, this final portion, as a way of capping off the first page and really drawing in the reader, ends with exactly what we needed to convince us to keep on reading: intrigue. Now, you can critique the use of the well-trodden, chosen one trope vibes that are being sent here, but it doesn't really apply here because of the time that this book was written, and things were not as they currently are. I think looking back at a book like this is important because we're not going too far back in time so that the prose is utterly foreign, but things are kind of different in the way that this author introduces the book as to what we might see now in a contemporary fantasy work. It can almost seem like an underwhelming introduction, but it's just really well crafted. This first page is full of great description. It evokes feelings of intrigue and otherworld fantasy without being too heavy-handed, keeping the reader focused on what is at hand. Not at all really touching on exposition or getting lost along the way with superfluous details. That's one of the major takeaways that I want to convey. Frank Herbert gets to the point here. There aren't a lot of frilly sentences. The dialogue is short, clean, and well-tempered. Yet the most important part of this page is intrigue, just as it almost always is. The number one goal of your first page should always be to convince the reader to read on to the next one. It sounds simple and it's so obvious, but it's so important. It can be done in a variety of ways. And in the current climate of the publishing industry, this opening may be a bit basic or even overdone. But when placed in its era, you can see how sound its construction really is. Each sentence in this page is doing its job and doing it well. And that's what makes this opening work. That's it for this episode of The Anatomy of an Opening. If you guys enjoyed this video, leave a like and a subscribe on the channel and check back for more videos every single week. If you guys think of any books that you would love to see me cover on this channel, both as an anatomy of an opening or in general. Let me know. I'm always looking for new book recommendations and anything like that. You know the deal. I will talk to you guys in the next video.